The morning mist clung to the forest like a gray blanket when Kale first saw her. He had been tracking a wounded deer for 3 days, following its blood trail through the dense woods that surrounded his tribe's territory. The Ironwood clan had always been hunters, and Kale was considered one of their finest. His arrow never missed its mark. His footsteps made no sound on the forest floor, and his eyes could spot movement where others saw only shadows. But on this particular morning, as he crouched behind a fallen log near the river, what he spotted was not the deer he had been pursuing. Instead, he saw a young woman kneeling by the water's edge, her hands bound with rough rope, her clothes torn and dirty. She was clearly not from his tribe. Her hair was lighter than the deep brown worn by Ironwood women, and her skin had a different tone that spoke of distant lands. Kale's first instinct was to retreat and report the stranger to the tribal elders. The Ironwood clan had strict rules about outsiders, especially during these troubled times when neighboring tribes were constantly raiding each other for resources and captives. But something about the woman's posture, the way she held her head despite her obvious distress, made him pause. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a strength in her bearing that reminded him of the wild horses that sometimes wandered through their territory. Magnificent creatures that refused to be broken no matter how long they were held captive. As he watched, she managed to cup some water in her bound hands and drink carefully, never taking her eyes off the surrounding forest. She was alert, ready to run or fight despite her restraints. The sound of approaching footsteps made Kale duck lower behind his hiding spot. 3 warriors from the rival Bloodstone tribe emerged from the trees, their faces painted with the red and black markings that struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. They had clearly been the ones to capture the woman, and from their casual manner, they seemed confident that she posed no threat of escape. "The chief will be pleased with this one," said the largest of the warriors, a man whose scarred face spoke of many battles. "She'll fetch a good price when we trade her to the northern clans. Or maybe he'll keep her for himself," laughed another, a younger man whose cruel eyes made Kale's jaw clench with anger. "She's prettier than any of the women in our own tribe." The woman said nothing, but Kale saw her shoulders tense as the warriors discussed her fate as if she were livestock. The third warrior, an older man with gray streaking his hair, seemed less interested in their crude jokes. "We should move soon," he advised. "The Ironwood hunters patrol this area regularly. If they find us here with their prize, there will be blood." Kale almost smiled at that comment. The Bloodstone warriors had no idea how close they were to an Ironwood hunter at that very moment. He could easily pick off all 3 with his bow before they had a chance to react, but taking them down would only solve the immediate problem. It wouldn't change the fact that this woman was a captive, far from home, with no one to protect her interests. As the warriors prepared to move out, forcing the woman to her feet with rough handling that made Kale's blood boil, he made a decision that would change his life forever. Instead of attacking or retreating, he followed them. For 2 days, he shadowed the Bloodstone warriors as they made their way toward their home territory. He learned that the woman's name was Lyra, and that she had been taken during a raid on a peaceful farming settlement 3 weeks' journey to the east. She had fought so fiercely during her capture that the warriors spoke of her with a mixture of respect and wariness. Kale also learned that she was clever. When the warriors thought she wasn't paying attention, he saw her leaving small signs along the trail. A broken twig here, a stone placed in an unusual way there. She was marking her path, hoping someone would follow. The warriors were too confident in their own abilities to notice these subtle messages, but Kale recognized them for what they were: the desperate actions of someone who refused to give up hope. On the evening of the 2nd day, as the Bloodstone warriors made camp in a small clearing, Kale finally made his move. He waited until 2 of the men had fallen asleep, and the 3rd was distracted by tending the fire. Moving as silently as a shadow, he crept to where Lyra sat tied to a tree, her eyes closed but her breathing too controlled for true sleep. When he touched her shoulder gently, her eyes snapped open, alert and ready to fight. But instead of alarm, he saw a flash of hope when she realized he was not one of her captors. Kale pressed a finger to his lips for silence, then carefully cut through her bonds with his hunting knife. "Can you run?" he whispered in the common tongue spoken by most of the tribes. She nodded, rubbing her wrists where the rope had chafed them raw. "Who are you?" Someone who doesn't believe in keeping caged birds, he replied, helping her to her feet. We need to move now, before they wake up. Together, they slipped away from the camp like ghosts in the night. Kale led her through the forest by paths known only to the most experienced ironwood hunters, routes that would be nearly impossible to track. As they put distance between themselves and her former captors, he found himself stealing glances at this woman who had captured his attention so completely. Lyra moved through the forest with surprising grace for someone who had been held captive for weeks. She seemed to understand the need for silence without being told, and she matched his pace without complaint, despite her obvious exhaustion. When they finally stopped to rest near a hidden spring, known only to his clan, she turned to face him with eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "Your people and theirs are enemies." "But that doesn't make you my friend." Kael considered her question carefully. The truth was complicated, involving feelings he didn't fully understand himself. "Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten," he said finally. "That strength isn't always about power over others. Sometimes it's about enduring when everything seems hopeless." She studied his face in the moonlight, and he found himself hoping she liked what she saw. "What will happen to me now? Will your tribe accept me, or will I simply be traded from one group of captors to another?" It was a fair question, and Kael wished he had a better answer to give her. The Ironwood clan was not known for their hospitality to strangers, especially during these uncertain times. Tribal law was clear about the fate of outsiders found within their territory. They could be enslaved, traded to other tribes, or expelled to fend for themselves in the wilderness. But as he looked at Lyra, her chin raised defiantly despite her vulnerable position, Kael knew he couldn't let any of those things happen to her. She had already endured too much, fought too hard, survived too long to be treated like property by anyone else. "My tribe has customs about outsiders," he admitted. "But they also have customs about protection. If someone claims you under their personal guard, you become their responsibility. No one else can touch you without facing them directly." "And would you do that for me?" she asked. "Claim me as your responsibility?" The question hung between them like a bridge that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Kael knew that claiming protection over Lyra would bring complications he couldn't even imagine. His tribe was already suspicious of his reluctance to choose a bride from among their own women. The elders had been pressuring him for months to settle down and start a family, to fulfill his duty as one of their most successful hunters. If he brought Lyra back and claimed her protection, it would be seen as a direct challenge to tribal expectations. Worse, it might be interpreted as a rejection of the Ironwood women who had been hoping to catch his attention. In a tribe where harmony and tradition were valued above individual desires, such actions could have serious consequences. But as he met Lyra's steady gaze, Kael realized that some choices were more important than avoiding consequences. "Yes," he said quietly. "I would do that for you." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes that made his heart beat faster. "Then I place myself under your protection, Hunter of the Ironwood clan. My life is in your hands." The formal words carried weight in the traditions of most tribes. By accepting her request for protection, Kael was binding himself to her welfare in ways that would be recognized even by his enemies. It was a commitment that went far beyond simple kindness or attraction. As they resumed their journey toward Ironwood territory, Kael found himself wondering what he had gotten himself into. Bringing Lyra home would certainly complicate his life, but as he watched her move confidently through the forest beside him, he realized he was looking forward to those complications. The Ironwood village came into sight just as the sun was reaching its peak the following day. Kael could see the familiar smoke rising from cooking fires, the children playing in the common areas, the hunters returning from their morning expeditions. It looked exactly the same as when he had left. But he knew that his return would change everything. "Stay close to me," he advised Lyra as they approached the outer guards. "Let me do the talking until we reach the council lodge." The guards recognized Kael immediately, but their friendly greetings died in their throats when they saw Lyra walking beside him. Word traveled quickly through small communities, and by the time they reached the heart of the village, a crowd had gathered to stare at the strange woman their best hunter had brought home. Chief Braun emerged from the council lodge, his weathered face serious as he took in the situation. Behind him came the tribal elders, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disapproval. Kale's own father, Gunnar, stood among them, his jaw tight with tension. "Kale, Ironwood," the chief said formally, using his full name to indicate the seriousness of the moment. "You have brought a stranger into our territory. Explain yourself." Kale stepped forward, making sure to keep Lyra slightly behind him in a gesture of protection that everyone present would understand. "Chief Braun, honored elders, I claim the right of protection over this woman, Lyra of the Eastern Farms. She has been wrongfully taken from her home and held captive by our enemies. I offer her the safety of our territory, under my personal guarantee." A murmur ran through the crowd. The right of protection was an ancient custom, rarely invoked, but legally binding when properly claimed. By invoking it publicly, Kale had made it impossible for the tribe to simply dispose of Lyra without going through him first. Elder Mora, the oldest woman on the council, stepped forward with narrowed eyes. "This is an unusual request, Kale. Why should we accept responsibility for a stranger when our own resources are stretched thin? What benefit does she bring to our people?" It was a trap, and Kale knew it. If he listed Lyra's practical skills or potential contributions, she would be evaluated like any other resource. But if he gave no practical reason for protecting her, the council might reject his claim entirely. "She brings the benefit of proving that the Ironwood clan keeps its word," he said carefully. "We have always prided ourselves on protecting those who cannot protect themselves. If we abandon that principle now, what separates us from the raiders and slavers who plague our borders?" Chief Braun studied both Kale and Lyra with calculating eyes. "The woman may stay, under your protection, while the council considers this matter. But know this, Kale Ironwood. Your guarantee extends beyond her welfare. You are responsible for her actions, her behavior, and any problems she may cause. Are you prepared to accept that burden?" "I am," Kale replied without hesitation. "Then let it be recorded," the chief declared. "Lyra of the Eastern Farms is under the protection of Kale Ironwood. By his own choice and pledge, the matter will be discussed further when the council meets in 3 days' time." As the crowd began to disperse, Kale felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He had successfully claimed protection for Lyra, but he knew the real challenges were just beginning. The disapproving looks from some of the tribal elders, the whispered conversations starting among the villagers, and the tight expression on his father's face, all indicated that his actions would have consequences far beyond what he had seen so far. But when Lyra touched his arm gently and whispered, "Thank you," he knew he had made the right choice, regardless of what those consequences might be. The 3 days that followed were unlike anything Kale had ever experienced in his life with the Ironwood clan. Every conversation seemed to stop when he entered a room. Every glance carried weight, and every interaction felt charged with unspoken tension. The village had divided itself into invisible camps, those who supported his decision to protect Lyra, those who opposed it, and those who remained undecided but watched everything with careful interest. Kale had given Lyra shelter in a small guest lodge typically reserved for visiting traders or diplomatic envoys. It was modest but comfortable, with a fireplace, a sleeping alcove, and enough space for her to have privacy while remaining within the village proper. He made sure she had food, clean clothes, and everything she needed. But he was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. The eyes of the entire tribe were upon them, and any perceived impropriety would only make their situation more difficult. Despite these constraints, he found himself drawn to spend time with her whenever his duties permitted. Lyra proved to be intelligent and observant, asking thoughtful questions about tribal customs and showing genuine interest in learning about Ironwood ways. She helped the village women with their daily tasks without being asked, demonstrating skills in weaving, herb preparation, and food preservation that earned grudging respect, even from some of her initial critics. "She works harder than half our own young women," admitted Vera, one of the senior wives. After watching Lyra spend an entire morning helping to repair fishing nets, and she doesn't complain about the work or act like it's beneath her. But not everyone was willing to be won over by Lyra's efforts to fit in. Elder Marcus, a stern man who had served as the tribe's war leader in his younger days, made his disapproval clear at every opportunity. He believed that accepting outsiders was a sign of weakness, a dangerous precedent that would encourage others to see the Ironwood clan as soft targets. "First, we take in strays," he declared loudly during one evening meal, making sure his voice carried to where Kale and Lyra sat. "Next, we'll be overrun by every beggar and outcast who thinks they can find easy living here. Mark my words. This will lead to nothing but trouble." His comments were echoed by several of the younger warriors, men who saw Kale's protection of Lyra as a rejection of tribal values they held sacred. Chief among these was Doran Blackfist, a skilled fighter whose own father served on the Council of Elders. Doran had always resented Kale's reputation as the tribe's finest hunter, and he saw this controversy as an opportunity to challenge his rival's standing within the community. "It seems our great hunter has forgotten his duty to his own people," Doran said loudly enough for most of the village to hear as Kale passed the training grounds one afternoon, too busy playing protector to some foreign woman to remember he should be choosing a wife from among the daughters of the Ironwood. The comment stung because it contained an uncomfortable element of truth. Kale had been avoiding the subject of marriage for months, much to the frustration of his parents and the tribal elders. Several eligible women had made their interest clear, and by tribal custom, a successful hunter of his age and status was expected to choose a bride and start producing the next generation of warriors. Among these potential brides was Senna Greenvale, the daughter of one of the most respected families in the tribe. She was beautiful, skilled in all the traditional arts expected of an Ironwood wife, and had been patiently waiting for Kale to make his intentions known. Her father, Elder Greenvale, was one of the most influential voices on the tribal council, and everyone knew that a marriage alliance between the families would strengthen Kale's position within the community significantly. But as Kale spent more time with Lyra, he found himself increasingly certain that his heart lay elsewhere. She challenged him in ways that no Ironwood woman ever had, asking questions that made him think about his assumptions and beliefs. When they talked by the fire in the evenings, carefully maintaining the proper distance required by tribal law, he felt more alive and engaged than he had in years. "Do all the men in your tribe hunt for their food?" Lyra asked one evening as they shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. "The men hunt and fish," Kale explained. "The women tend the gardens, prepare food, weave cloth, and manage the household affairs. It's been our way for generations, and everyone is content with these arrangements," she pressed. "No one ever wishes they could try something different?" The question made Kale pause. In truth, he had never really considered whether people might want different roles than the ones tradition assigned them. "It works," he said finally. "Each person knows their place and their responsibilities. There's stability in that." Arlie Endins carted, then other plasting. "Stability, yes," Lyra agreed. "But what about growth? Discovery? In my homeland, we had a woman who was the finest tracker for 3 villages in any direction, and there was a man whose skill at weaving was legendary throughout the region. They followed their talents instead of their traditions. Such ideas would be considered radical by Ironwood standards, but Kale found himself intrigued by the possibilities they suggested. What would it be like to live in a place where people could choose their own paths instead of following predetermined roles? These conversations did not go unnoticed by the rest of the tribe. Several people reported seeing Kale and Lyra talking earnestly together, and rumors began to spread about the nature of their relationship. Some suggested that the hunter had fallen under some kind of foreign enchantment. Others whispered that he was planning to abandon tribal law entirely and take Lyra as his wife, without proper ceremony or approval. The situation came to a head on the morning of the 3rd day, when the tribal council convened to make their official decision about Lyra's fate. Kale was summoned to appear before them, and he arrived to find all 7 elders seated in their ceremonial positions around the council fire. Chief Braun sat at the center, his face grave and unreadable. "Kale Ironwood," the chief began formally, "we have spent these 3 days considering your request to grant protection to the outsider woman. We have observed her behavior, questioned those who have interacted with her, and debated the implications of accepting her presence among us." Kale stood silently, knowing that interrupting the formal proceedings would only hurt his cause. Around the edges of the council lodge, other members of the tribe had gathered to hear the decision. He could see his parents among the crowd, their faces tight with worry. Senna Greenvale stood with her family, her expression carefully neutral despite what this decision might mean for her future. The woman has shown herself to be industrious and respectful, Elder Mora acknowledged. She has made no attempt to cause disruption or to question our ways inappropriately. In these respects, she has proven herself worthy of consideration. However, Elder Marcus interjected, his voice carrying clearly through the lodge. The question is not whether she deserves our protection, but whether granting it serves the best interests of our people. We live in dangerous times, surrounded by enemies who would see any sign of weakness as an opportunity to strike. Elder Greenvale cleared his throat and stood, commanding attention through his position as one of the most senior council members. There is another matter that must be addressed, he said solemnly. Kale, you are 26 years old, a successful hunter, and a valued member of our community. By tribal law and tradition, you should have chosen a wife and started a family by now. Your continued bachelorhood has become a source of concern among the elders. Kale felt his stomach tighten as he began to understand where this conversation was heading. The council wasn't just deciding Lyra's fate. They were using the situation to force a resolution to his own delayed marriage. Several suitable women have expressed interest in becoming your wife, Elder Greenvale continued. My own daughter Senna among them. She is of good family, proven skill, and appropriate age. A union between our families would strengthen both bloodlines and provide you with the partnership you need to fulfill your adult responsibilities. Chief Braun nodded gravely. The council has decided that we will grant temporary protection to Lyra of the Eastern Farms. She may remain among us for one full season, during which time we will help her develop the skills and resources needed to make her own way in the world. KL felt a moment of relief, but the chief's next words quickly dispelled any sense of victory. However, Braun continued, his voice taking on a tone of absolute authority. This protection comes with conditions. Kale, you will use this season to fulfill your own obligations to the tribe. You will choose a wife from among the eligible women of the Ironwood clan before the next full moon. If you fail to do so, both you and the woman under your protection will be exiled from our territory. The words hit Kale like a physical blow. The next full moon was only 2 weeks away. The council was forcing him to choose between his growing feelings for Lyra and his entire life within the tribe. If he refused to marry one of the Ironwood women, both he and Lyra would be cast out to face the wilderness alone. With winter approaching and hostile tribes controlling most of the surrounding territory. Furthermore, Elder Marcus added with obvious satisfaction, during these 2 weeks, you will cease all private contact with the outsider woman. She will be housed with the unmarried women under Elder Mora's supervision, and you will focus your attention on the appropriate candidates for marriage. Any attempt to circumvent these restrictions will result in immediate exile for both of you. Kale's mind raced as he tried to process the implications of the council's decision. They had given him an ultimatum disguised as a compromise. Choose a traditional Ironwood bride, or lose everything he had ever known. The message was clear. His feelings for Lyra were irrelevant to his duty to the tribe. Do you accept these terms? Chief Braun asked formally. Kale looked around the council lodge, meeting the eyes of each elder in turn. Some looked sympathetic to his plight. Others seemed satisfied that tribal order would be maintained. And a few appeared genuinely conflicted about the harsh choice they were forcing upon him. When his gaze fell on Senna Greenvale, he saw understanding and resignation in her expression. She knew as well as anyone that his heart was no longer available to her, even if tribal law might soon force his hand. I accept the terms, Kale said quietly, knowing he had no choice in the matter. Then it is decided, the chief declared. The woman Lyra will be moved to appropriate housing immediately. Kale, you will present yourself to Elder Greenvale this evening to begin formal courtship proceedings with his daughter. The ceremony will take place in 14 days, immediately following the full moon ritual. As the council members began to file out of the lodge, Kale felt the weight of their decision settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Around him, The gathered tribe members were already beginning to discuss the implications of what they had just witnessed. Some seemed pleased that tradition would be upheld, others appeared troubled by the harsh ultimatum, but all understood that the situation had reached a critical point. Doran Blackfist approached with a mocking smile. "Well, Hunter, it seems the council has solved your little problem for you. Soon you'll have a proper Ironwood wife, and can put aside these foolish notions about foreign women." Kale's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm. Starting a fight now would only make everything worse. "The matter is decided," he said evenly. "There's nothing more to discuss." "Oh, but there is," Doran replied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some of us have been talking, and we think you might try to find a way around the council's decision. Maybe attempt some kind of rescue or escape with your precious captive. We want you to know that won't be tolerated." "What are you suggesting?" Kale asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I'm suggesting that if you try to defy the council's will, you'll have more to worry about than exile. Some traditions are more important than the whims of individuals, even individuals who think their hunting skills make them special." The threat was clear, even if not explicitly stated. If Kale tried to run away with Lyra, he would face violent opposition from his own tribesmen. Doran and his supporters were prepared to enforce the council's decision through whatever means necessary. That evening, as Kale watched Lyra's few possessions being moved to the women's lodge under Elder Mora's stern supervision, he found himself facing the most difficult decision of his life. He could accept his fate, marry Senna Greenvale, and live the rest of his life knowing he had abandoned the woman who had awakened feelings he never knew he possessed. Or he could defy his entire tribe, risk both their lives in the wilderness, and face the possibility of violent pursuit by his own people. As Lyra disappeared into the women's lodge without being permitted to speak with him, Kale caught a glimpse of her face in the firelight. She looked calm and resigned, but he could see the pain in her eyes. She understood the impossible position they were both in, and she was prepared to accept whatever fate awaited her, rather than ask him to sacrifice everything for her sake. But as Kale walked slowly toward his own lodge, his mind was already working on a third option. One that would require more courage than he had ever needed for any hunt, and more defiance than his tribe would ever forgive. The council had given him 2 weeks to choose a bride. But they had also given him 2 weeks to plan. The game was far from over. 2 weeks had never felt so long or so short at the same time. Kale went through the motions of courtship with Senna Greenvale, sharing formal meals with her family, walking with her through the village under the watchful eyes of chaperones, and discussing the practical arrangements of their upcoming marriage. Senna was everything the tribal elders wanted in a wife: dutiful, skilled, and willing to accept the match, despite knowing his heart belonged elsewhere. During their carefully supervised conversations, she proved to be more perceptive than many people gave her credit for. "You don't have to pretend with me, Kyle," she said quietly during one of their evening walks. "I know this marriage isn't your choice any more than it's mine." "I'm sorry, Senna," he replied honestly. "You deserve better than a husband whose thoughts are elsewhere." She smiled sadly. "Perhaps. But we both understand duty, don't we? Sometimes what we want and what we must do are different things." Her acceptance only made Kale feel worse about what he was planning. Senna would be humiliated when he defied the council's decision, and her family would bear the shame of a rejected marriage proposal. But as much as he regretted the pain he would cause, he couldn't bring himself to abandon Lyra to whatever fate awaited her after the marriage ceremony. During those 2 weeks, Kale was forbidden from speaking directly with Lyra, but he found ways to observe her from a distance. She spent her days learning traditional ironwood crafts under Elder Mora's instruction, working alongside the other unmarried women of the tribe. She was polite and diligent, but he could see the sadness in her posture, the way her shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. The other women treated her with cautious courtesy rather than warmth. Most understood that she would be leaving soon, one way or another, and saw little point in forming attachments that would only be severed. A few, led by Doran's sister Mira, made subtle comments designed to remind Lyra of her outsider status and temporary welcome. "It must be difficult," Mira said loudly enough for others to hear. while they worked on a communal weaving project. Knowing that your presence here depends entirely on someone else's charity. I suppose you're grateful that Kale chose to protect you, even if it means he can never truly care for you the way he would for one of his own people. Lyra's hands never paused in their work, but Kale saw her jaw tighten slightly. I am grateful for the protection I've been given, she replied evenly, and I understand the temporary nature of all such arrangements. Her dignified response only seemed to irritate Mira further. Temporary indeed, though I suppose some foreign women might try to use their exotic appeal to convince a man to abandon his duty to his tribe. Elder Mora intervened before the conversation could escalate further, but Kale had heard enough to know that Lyra was facing constant pressure and subtle harassment. The knowledge made his determination to defy the council even stronger, despite the enormous risks involved. As the full moon approached, bringing with it the deadline for his marriage decision, Kale finalized his desperate plan. He had spent his evenings preparing supplies, food, water, weapons, and warm clothing that could be quickly gathered and carried. He had studied the patrol schedules of the tribal guards and identified the best route for leaving the village undetected. Most importantly, he had found a way to communicate his intentions to Lyra without arousing suspicion. His method was risky but clever. Each morning, he left small tokens along the path between the men's lodge and the practice grounds. A specific arrangement of stones, a broken twig placed just so, a mark scratched in the dirt that would look accidental to most observers. These were the same kinds of trail signs Lyra had left during her captivity with the Bloodstone warriors, and he hoped she would recognize them as intentional communication. The signs conveyed a simple message: be ready to leave on the night of the full moon, after the ceremony celebrating the tribal union. By then, everyone would be focused on the celebration. Guards would be relaxed from ceremonial drinking, and the confusion of the festivities would provide cover for their escape. But Kale's careful plans were disrupted on the morning before the full moon, when Chief Braun summoned him for a private conversation. The chief's lodge was simply furnished but comfortable, with hunting trophies decorating the walls and a fire crackling in the central pit. Braun gestured for Kale to sit across from him, his weathered face serious but not unkind. Tomorrow you will become a married man, the chief began without preamble. It's a significant step, one that will change your role within the tribe and your responsibilities to our people. Yes, Chief, Kale replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. I want you to know that I understand this marriage is not entirely of your own choosing. Braun continued. The council's decision was made for the good of the tribe, but I recognize that it places you in a difficult position. Kale remained silent, unsure how much the chief suspected about his true feelings or his plans. However, Braun said, leaning forward slightly, I also want you to know that some of us have observed your behavior over these past weeks, your distraction during training exercises, your frequent glances toward the women's lodge, your general attitude of someone wrestling with an important decision. Kale's heart began to race. Had his preparations been noticed? Was this conversation a trap designed to expose his escape plan? I'm concerned, the chief continued, that you might be considering something foolish. Something that would force me to take actions neither of us would enjoy. The warning was clear, even delivered in Chief Braun's calm, measured tone. Kale met the older man's gaze steadily. I understand my obligations to the tribe, Chief. And I understand the consequences of failing to meet them. Do you? Braun asked. Because I'm not sure you fully grasp what exile would mean. It's not simply being asked to leave our territory. It's being declared dead to your family, your friends, everyone who has ever cared about you. It's facing the wilderness with winter approaching and every other tribe in the region viewing you as fair game for slavery or worse. And the woman under my protection would face the same fate, Kale added quietly. Yes, Braun confirmed. Her fate is tied to yours now, by your own choice. That's a heavy responsibility, especially when the alternative is a comfortable life as a respected member of our community. Chief Braun stood and walked to the window, looking out at the village where people were already beginning preparations for the next day's ceremony. Senna Greenvale is a good woman, Kale. She would make you a fine wife, bear you strong children, and help you build a life of honor within our traditions. Many men would consider themselves fortunate to have such a match arranged for them. I know, Kale said, and he meant it. Senna deserved a husband who could appreciate her qualities and return her affection. The tragedy was that he couldn't be that man, no matter how much everyone wanted him to be. Then make the right choice, Braun said, turning back to face him. Marry the girl tomorrow. Settle into your proper role, and let the outsider woman find her own path when the season ends. It's the sensible thing to do. Kale nodded respectfully, but made no promises. As he left the chief's lodge, he knew that his conversation had been observed by others, and his careful neutrality would be interpreted as compliance with the council's demands. Good. The less suspicious anyone became, the better his chances of success. That evening, as the tribe gathered for the traditional pre-wedding feast, Kale played his role perfectly. He sat beside Senna and her family, accepted congratulations from well-wishers, and participated in the customary toasts to their future happiness. But all the while, his attention was focused on the women's section of the gathering, where Lyra sat quietly among the unmarried girls. During one of the evening's traditional dances, when attention was focused on the performers and the ceremonial fire, Kale managed to catch Lyra's eye for just a moment. He touched his chest lightly, then gestured almost imperceptibly toward the village gate. The movement was so subtle that anyone watching would have thought he was simply adjusting his clothing. But he saw understanding flash in her eyes. The feast continued late into the night, with much drinking and celebration among the adults. Perfect conditions for what Kale had planned. When the festivities finally began to wind down, and people started returning to their lodges, he made his way to his own quarters and waited. The village grew quiet as midnight approached. Most people had either fallen asleep or were too drunk to be alert. The guards at the village perimeter were focused outward, watching for external threats rather than internal movement. Kyle gathered his prepared supplies and made his way carefully through the shadows toward the women's lodge. He had almost reached his destination when a voice called out from behind him. Going somewhere, Great Hunter? Kyle turned to find Doran Blackfist and 3 other warriors blocking his path. They were armed and clearly sober, despite the evening's festivities. Doran's mocking smile told Kale that his plans had been discovered and anticipated. I might ask you the same question, Kale replied carefully, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. It's late to be wandering the village. We've been keeping watch, Doran said, taking a step closer. Some of us suspected you might try something like this. Running away on the night before your wedding? Very dishonorable, even for someone who's forgotten his duty to his people. My duty is to protect someone who was placed under my care, Kale said. I don't expect you to understand. Duty is my place. I don't expect you to understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, Doran replied. You've let your fascination with exotic flesh cloud your judgment about what really matters. Well, we're here to prevent you from making a mistake that would shame the entire Ironwood clan. The other warriors spread out slightly, cutting off any escape route. Kale recognized them as some of Doran's closest supporters, men who had been vocal about their disapproval of his protection of Lyra from the beginning. The council gave me a choice, Kale said, trying to buy time while he evaluated his options. I'm making it. The council expected you to make the right choice, Doran corrected. When you failed to do so, it became necessary for others to intervene. More figures emerged from the shadows around them. Kale realized with growing alarm that this was not a spontaneous confrontation. It was a carefully planned intervention involving at least a dozen warriors. His chances of fighting his way out were essentially zero. What do you want? He asked. Simple, Doran replied. You're going to return to your lodge, sleep off whatever madness has possessed you, and marry Senna Greenvale tomorrow as planned. The foreign woman will be dealt with according to tribal law. Dealt with how? Kale demanded. That's no longer your concern, Doran said coldly. Your protection of her ends at sunrise, When you become a married man with responsibilities to your wife and tribe, the implications were clear. If Kale went through with the marriage ceremony, Lyra would lose his protection and become vulnerable to whatever fate the tribe decided for her. Given the hostility of men like Doran and Elder Marcus, that fate would likely be enslavement, or worse. "I can't do that," Kale said quietly. "Then you've chosen exile and death for both of you," Doran replied. "But we won't let you slink away like a coward in the night. If you want to defy tribal law and tradition, you'll do it openly, where everyone can see the consequences of your choices." One of the other warriors spoke up. "The traditional challenge still applies, Kale. If you believe your cause is just, you can face Doran in single combat at dawn. Winner takes all. The right to determine the woman's fate and your own." Kale's mind raced as he considered this unexpected turn. A formal challenge would give him a chance to fight for Lyra's freedom, but it would also mean facing Doran in front of the entire tribe, with deadly weapons and no guarantee of victory. Doran was a skilled warrior, perhaps not as experienced a hunter as Kale, but certainly dangerous in combat. "And if I refuse the challenge?" Kale asked. "Then you accept exile immediately," Doran said. "You and the woman leave our territory now, tonight, with nothing but the clothes you're wearing. In the dark, with winter coming, without supplies or weapons. How long do you think you'll survive?" It was no choice at all. Fighting Doran at least gave him a chance of victory, while immediate exile with no supplies was essentially a death sentence for both of them. "I accept your challenge," Kale said formally. "Single combat at dawn. Winner determines all." Doran's smile widened. "Excellent. The entire tribe will witness your defeat and understand the consequences of putting personal desires ahead of tribal loyalty." As the warriors escorted Kale back to his lodge to wait for dawn, he caught sight of a figure watching from the shadows near the women's lodge. Lyra had heard at least part of the confrontation, and her face was pale with understanding. She knew that her fate, and his, would be decided in just a few hours by the outcome of mortal combat. The remaining hours before dawn passed slowly. Kale tried to rest, knowing he would need all his strength and focus for the coming fight. But sleep eluded him. Instead, he spent the time checking and rechecking his weapons, stretching his muscles, and preparing mentally for what might be the last challenge of his life. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the sound of drums summoned the entire tribe to the central gathering area. Word of the challenge had spread quickly, and people emerged from their lodges with expressions ranging from excitement to dismay. This kind of formal combat was rare in tribal society, usually reserved for the most serious disputes about honor or leadership. Chief Braun presided over the proceedings with obvious reluctance. "This challenge has been issued according to tribal law," he announced to the assembled crowd. "Doran Blackfist has questioned Kale Ironwood's fitness to make decisions regarding tribal matters. The outcome of their combat will determine the final disposition of all disputed questions." Kale could see Lyra standing with the other women, her face composed but her hands clenched into fists at her sides. His parents stood with the crowd of observers, his mother's face streaked with tears and his father's expression grim with resignation. Senna Greenvale watched with dignity, understanding that this fight would determine whether she would become a wife or remain a rejected bride. The two combatants faced each other in the center of the circle, each armed with a spear and a knife, according to tribal tradition. The rules were simple: fight until one yielded, fled, or died. There would be no interference from spectators and no mercy shown by the victor. "Begin," Chief Braun commanded. Doran attacked immediately, rushing forward with his spear aimed at Kale's chest. But Kale had expected the aggressive opening and sidestepped at the last moment, bringing his own weapon around in a sweeping arc that forced Doran to stumble past him. The two warriors circled each other warily, testing for weaknesses and opportunities. Doran was strong and aggressive, pressing forward with powerful attacks designed to overwhelm his opponent quickly. Kale fought with the patience and precision of an experienced hunter, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their spears clashed together repeatedly, the wooden shafts cracking from the force of their blows. Kale managed to score a shallow cut on Doran's arm, while Doran's spear point tore a gash in Kale's shoulder that sent blood streaming down his chest. As the fight continued, It became clear that both men were evenly matched in skill and determination. The crowd watched in tense silence, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be remembered and discussed for generations to come. The turning point came when Doran attempted a risky thrust that left him momentarily off balance. Kale seized the opportunity, hooking Doran's spear with his own and twisting it out of his opponent's grip. With his reach advantage eliminated, Doran drew his knife and charged forward desperately. The knife fight that followed was brutal and decisive. Both men sustained multiple wounds as they grappled and slashed at each other, but Kale's experience hunting dangerous animals gave him an advantage in close combat. When Doran overextended himself in a wild swing, Kale managed to trap his knife arm and drive his own blade deep into his opponent's side. Doran collapsed to his knees, his face pale with shock and blood loss. Kale stood over him with his knife, ready to deliver a killing blow, waiting for either surrender or a command to finish the fight. "Yield," Doran gasped, his hand pressed against his wound. "I yield." The crowd erupted in mixed cheers and groans as Chief Braun declared Kale the victor. According to the terms of the challenge, he had won the right to determine both his own fate and Lyra's. But as he looked around at the faces of his tribespeople, some approving, others shocked or disapproving, he realized that his victory had come at a tremendous cost. "What is your decision, Kale Ironwood?" Chief Braun asked formally. Kale walked to where Lyra stood with the other women and offered her his hand. She took it without hesitation, stepping forward to stand beside him before the entire tribe. "I choose Lyra of the Eastern Farms as my wife and partner," he announced clearly. "We will leave Ironwood territory today and seek our fortune elsewhere, rather than remain where our union would cause continued division." The chief nodded gravely. "So be it. By the laws of combat and challenge, your choice is recognized. You and your chosen wife have until sunset to gather your belongings and depart." As the crowd began to disperse, some people approached to wish them well or offer small gifts for their journey. Others turned away without a word, their disapproval clear. Senna Greenvale approached with quiet dignity. "I hope you find happiness," she said simply. "Both of you." Kale's parents came to say goodbye, his mother weeping openly, and his father clasping his shoulder in a gesture of grudging respect. "You've chosen a hard path," Gunnar said quietly. "But you've chosen it with honor. That's something, at least." By sunset, Kale and Lyra stood at the edge of Ironwood territory with their few possessions packed for travel. The village they had both called home, however, temporarily, lay behind them as they faced an uncertain future in the wider world. "Do you regret your choice?" Lyra asked as they began walking toward the distant mountains. Kale looked back once at the smoke rising from familiar cooking fires, then turned his attention to the path ahead. "No," he said firmly. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They walked together into the gathering dusk, two people who had defied tradition and tribal law for the chance to choose love over duty. Behind them lay everything they had ever known. Ahead lay only possibilities, as vast and unknown as the wilderness itself. 3 years later, travelers would bring word back to the Ironwood clan about a pair of skilled hunters who had established themselves in the northern territories, working as guides and protectors for merchant caravans traveling the dangerous mountain passes. The man was said to be deadly with a bow, and his wife was rumored to be equally skilled at tracking and survival. They had built a small but prosperous life together, free from the constraints of tribal law but bound by something far stronger. The travelers said their devotion to each other was legendary among the trading communities, a love story that proved some bonds were worth any sacrifice to preserve. And when asked about their past, the hunter would only smile and say that the best choices in life were often the ones that required the most courage to make.